Hello. In this video, I'm going to teach you a little bit about high bypass turbofan jet engines. But first, I want to show you a couple of pictures at the pylon right near the exhaust, in line with the exhaust. You can see that there's modifications of the pylon at the just above the exhaust and behind it, where there are nozzles. This is perfect. This is a perfect place for chemicals to be ejected out of an aircraft right into the exhaust stream to make it look like it's a normal trail for a jet engine for commercial jets. So just look at the materials near the nozzles. It's a modified pylon. The material's not the original color, it's modified, and it's an add-on. I have checked drawings, and this is not an original kind of modification or equipment for a new aircraft. This is one of the places that is very likely that we are being sprayed from. So now, having said that, let's look at a large bypass, high bypass turbofan engine, jet engine, and that's what I'm going to be talking about here. Take a look at some of the pictures, and at some point here in the video, I'm going to stop showing pictures of the engine, and I'm going to show you the chemical trails. So you just listen and look at the trails in the picture, and you'll see that there's no way that a high bypass turbofan jet engine in a commercial aircraft or large military aircraft can produce any of these trails. High bypass turbofan engines do not create condensation trails. And here is a bit of an explanation why. So don't be fooled. Long or short, if you see a trail coming out of a jet, with very few exceptions, it's an intentional toxic chemical aerosol, also known as chemtrails. It is also sprayed over populations, and that is an inhumane act on a population, and it is a crime against humanity. Police chiefs, take notice and act to protect. So you think those lines in the sky are contrails? Think again. The trails being left in the sky by large aircraft cannot possibly be condensation trails or contrails. Once this is understood, then we are left with the ominous question, what do these trails consist of? High bypass turbofan jet engines do not create condensation trails. The ratio of the air to the exhaust is much too high to facilitate the formation of condensation, because the majority of the air expelled from the back of the engine is not combusted. It is passed through the fan and simply blown out the back without mixing with any fuel at all. It's almost as if it's a propeller plane and using the jet turbine as the engine making the propeller turn around. So let me say that again. The ratio of air to exhaust is much too high to facilitate the formation of condensation, because the majority of the air expelled from the back of the engine is not combusted. It is passed through by the fan and simply blown out the back without any form of mixing with fuel or any form of exhaust because of that. Turbine engines are the power plant for these high bypass turbofans. Turbine engines are used in other applications besides powering jets. They are also used to power helicopters, yet we never see trails coming from helicopters, and the reason is simple. turbine engines almost never produce condensation trails. In the turbofan jet engine, notice the large ratio between the bypass fan diameter and the core part of the engine? It's huge. Every condition at the exhaust output of the engine is wrong for contrail formation. The formation of condensation trails requires high vacuum, cold temperatures, and high humidity. However, the output side of a jet engine contains mostly outside air that has been pushed through the engine by the large ducted fan, the bypass fan. The ducted fan is the set of spinning blades that you see when you look at the front of the engine. So let me repeat. The output side of the jet engine contains mostly outside air that has been pushed through the engine by those blades. This high pressure at the output of the engine is contrary for the formation of condensation trails because of the pressurized air. And pressurized air has the ability to hold much more water in suspension without producing condensation. Only a fraction of the air that enters the engine is taken in by the turbine engine. The air is mixed with jet fuel, essentially kerosene. It's combusted, and then exits the engine under very high pressure and high temperature. Condensation formation requires a decrease in ambient air pressure to form, but the output of the turbine is under very high pressure, which prohibits the formation of condensation trails. Physics also tells us that condensation forms when air is cooled. But since the exhaust of the turbine engine within a jet is very hot, condensation formation is once again prohibited. Hot air can hold much more water without producing condensation. Furthermore, the ratio of air to fuel used in high bypass turbofan engines is as high as possible. Lots of air, but relatively little fuel, so as to keep engines efficient and cost effective. So the reduced amount of fuel in this ratio results in a lack of water in the exhaust. And this is yet another reason that high bypass jet turbofans cannot produce condensation trails. In short, the more efficient the engine, the less fuel it uses per unit of air moved, and this renders the high bypass turbofans virtually incapable of producing condensation trails unless they use water injection, which is extremely rare today. Simply said, every condition that is necessary for contrail formation is absent in the high bypass turbofan jet engine. Let me say that again. Every condition that is necessary for contrail formation is absent in a high bypass turbofan jet engine, and that is on all commercial aircraft. So commercial aircraft cannot be putting out a contrail. If you go to an airport and watch jets take off, you will see that they emit a faint trail of black soot, which is typical of burnt jet fuel, kerosene. But you will not see water vapor. The average diabatic lapse rate, which is the rate of decrease in temperature with altitude, is about 3 Fahrenheit degrees per 1,000 foot. Since the average temperature on the ground is 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius, you can calculate that at 30,000 feet, the average temperature is 59 minus 3 times 30 equals minus 31 Fahrenheit or minus 35 Celsius. This cold, dry air provides inadequate conditions for condensation trail formation. Real condensation trails. Let's talk about real condensation trails. Real condensation trails, and you're not going to be thinking of what I'm going to be saying. Real condensation trails form not behind commonly used engines, but behind high vacuum areas of wings. This occurs when a jet is pitching up or when the jet is using heavy flaps. Both of these conditions greatly increase the vacuum or lift produced by the wing and therefore increase the probability of contrail formation. Now, contrails will normally appear on the outside edge of the wing or just outside the flaps when in a heavy flap condition. Both of these conditions require high relative humidity as well, which in most cases just isn't there. Contrails can also appear above the top surface of a wing while a jet is pitching up, such as just before touchdown, because the high vacuum created while changing pitch. Most of the wing contrails, explained just now, dissipate as soon as the vacuum zone ends. This explains why contrails typically last only 5 or 10 feet behind a wing, less than a second. As the vacuum zone ends, the air very rapidly reabsorbs the water vapor, causing the contrail to dissipate, except under the most humid conditions when the ambient air is unable to reabsorb the water. Let's talk about jet turbines or turbojets. In contrast to the typical turbofans that are used in commercial aircraft, turbojets work differently. Now we're talking about turbojets, not turbofan engines. Instead of just pushing the majority of the air out the back using a large fan, like a turbofan does, all or most, in the case of low bypass turbojets, most of the air is taken in by the engine and is forced through the combustion section of the engine. This difference in design has a few important implications. First, these turbojets, these engines, are less efficient at lower speeds, below Mach 2, but they produce thrust at much more higher velocity. This is why they are used on jet fighters and other high-speed combat aircraft. They are not used on large military aircraft and not used at all on commercial aircraft. It's just way too expensive to use a turbojet on a commercial aircraft. You don't need the speed and the power. Second, these engines have more water in their exhaust and therefore have the potential to produce short, non-persistent condensation trails when all of the required conditions are just right. And I mean just right. These conditions are so rare, and so that contrail formation is very rare, but it can occur. Remember, turbojet engines are used only on fighter jets, not large military aircraft and none on commercial aircraft. Again, that's turbojet engines, not turbofan jet engines. Remember, the turbofan has a large diameter at the front and it is basically just pushing air behind it. Contrail suppression patents are out there. The rare but possible contrail forming potential of turbojet engines, which are used on military craft, fighter craft, caused the development of contrail suppression technology. This technology reduces the contrail forming potential of these engines so that jets cannot easily be spotted while flying over enemy territory. Government-funded disinformation contractors often cite these patents as evidence that high bypass turbofans create contrails. But this is a blatant misapplication of the patents. The patents only apply to turbojets or low bypass turbojets used on fighter aircraft and not on the high bypass turbofans used on commercial aircraft and large military aircraft. So they're not contrails. Turbojets and low bypass turbofans, the only engines capable of producing rare condensation trails, are not used on commercial jets today. Nor are they used on large military jets. Instead, virtually all commercial and all large military jets today use the much more efficient high bypass turbofan jet engine. It's the high bypass turbofan engine that are used on most commercial jets, and they just do not produce condensation trails. Since we know that the high bypass turbofans are virtually incapable of producing condensation trails, then the trails we see coming from these countless jets today cannot be contrails. Instead, a mountain of evidence now indicates that these trails are deliberate particulate aerosols, chemtrails. You can easily identify high bypass turbofans by their large diameter, and this engine type is clearly visible on all chemtrail jets we see emitting trails today. Let's talk about rare water injection engines. The use of water injection in aircraft engines is rare, but it was used in a few World War II aircraft, which explains the few contrail pictures floating around from that era. The Rolls-Royce Spey 512 is used to power the BAC 111. This aging commercial aircraft is in very limited use today. There's about 50 still in service, and most are outside of North America. If you see a short, non-persistent trail being emitted from a commercial jet, there is a small chance that it's an old Spey Series 500 turbofan. If you see a short, non-commercial trail being emitted from any large jet, it's a new non-persistent chemtrail. Keep in mind that a slowly increasing number of chemtrail jets have been painted to look like commercial jets. We have already seen this deceptive tactic being used with military drones. For the past few years, many have witnessed the overnight change in the trail emitted from these countless jets, from long, persistent trails to short, non-persistent trails. On the same day, many or most of the jets began flying higher, and this change was obviously done to make the spraying less noticeable to the public. And this was an important tactic they used to counter the fact that awareness of this massive toxic aerosol spraying campaign is growing rapidly in dozens of countries around the world. Everybody's waking up. Don't be fooled, long or short. If you see a trail coming out of a jet, with very few exceptions, it's an intentional toxic chemical aerosol. It's a chemtrail. So if you see a trail coming out of a jet, with very few exceptions, it's a chemtrail. The government is currently spending hundreds of millions of dollars to spread disinformation to confuse the public on a variety of subjects. The most pervasive subject of disinformation today is about geoengineering or chemtrails. Below, we will expose the false claim that they make. Claim 1. Newer, more modern jets are flying higher in the atmosphere, enabling them to generate enormous plumes of condensation. Well, the fact is that the vast majority of witnessed trail formation has been witnessed by low-flying jets, rendering this claim irrelevant. Fact, the altitude in which aircraft fly has remained unchanged for over 30 years. This widely known fact renders this claim irrelevant. The favored altitude for commercial air traffic ranges between 25,000 to 35,000 feet, well within the Earth's troposphere. The vast majority of early trails between 1995 and 2005 were witnessed at altitudes so low the public was easily able to identify the jet type and count the engines. Between 2005 and 2010, numerous sky watchers witnessed sudden changes. First, they witnessed a majority of the jets changing from low altitudes to high altitudes. Second, they witnessed the majority of the jets changing their trail size from long persistent trails to short, non-persistent trails. Both of these changes typically took place on the same day in any given location. It appears that this change was designed to make the trails appear less ominous to the public. It's important to note that even after this change, some jets still produce persistent trails several days per month, well, many more now, almost every day now, and this is likely necessary to avoid public scrutiny that would occur if all trails suddenly vanished. Here's another claim. Newer jet engines burn more fuel newer jet engines burn fuel more completely, turning more fuel to water. So a claim is that the newer jet engines burn fuel more completely, turning more of the fuel to water. Well, the fact is that modern high bypass turbofans, which are used on virtually all large commercial and military aircraft, they burn much less fuel per unit of ejected air, often 25% less fuel, and therefore they produce much less water vapor than older engines. You will never witness a high bypass turbofan jet engine ejecting water at an airport. You will only witness a faint black soot that is the result of burnt jet fuel or kerosene. During takeoff, these engines produce the maximum amount of water vapor as compared to any other stage of flight, because this is the time that the fuel to velocity ratio is the highest. In other words, if an engine was to produce visible water vapor, it would be most likely witnessed during takeoff. However, these engines are incapable of producing vapor trails even during their most inefficient operating condition, which is takeoff. Here's another claim. The sudden appearance of trails in the past 10 years is caused by an increase in air traffic. Well, fact is that air traffic increases less than 1% per year. This amounts to a total increase of about 9% in the past 10 years. Chemical particulate spraying was used in Vietnam and is believed to have been used in early testing in North America in the 1980s. During this time, there were extremely few visible trails in the sky, and since high bypass turbofans are virtually incapable of producing any kind of trail, these early trails were likely geoengineering tests. Developing a program of this size would require many years of testing and development, and there is much documentation that this testing has been conducted on the public for decades. And that is an inhumane act on a population, and that is a crime against humanity. We need the police chiefs to escalate this, since they will say it's not their jurisdiction. Doesn't matter. Escalate it. It's your job now. It's worth mentioning that a few water injection spay turbofans are still in service, so it's likely that a few people witnessed them in the 80s and beyond. Today, there's about 50 BAC-111s that are in service. This aircraft is one of the few that use water injection, but most of these aircraft are not used within North America. Another claim is that the government worked on developing contrail suppression technology because of the trails produced by commercial jets. Well, the fact is that the patents showing contrail suppression technology were developed for low bypass turbofans and turbojets, neither of which are used on commercial or large military aircraft. This technology was designed to suppress contrail formation on the types of engines which are low bypass turbofan and turbojets, used specifically on military jet fighters to make them harder to see over enemy territory. Government disinformation contractors use these patents to convince the public that the large jets we see in the sky are producing contrails. But all large military and commercial jets use very efficient high bypass turbofans, which are virtually incapable of producing condensation trails. Even the fleet of aging Boeing 707s produced from the 50s to the 70s, which originally used low bypass turbofans, have now been retrofitted with highly efficient high bypass turbofans to dramatically cut operating costs. Another claim is the photos floating around on the internet showing contrails from military jets in the 50s proves that jet engines produce contrails. Well, the fact is that the handful of photos from the 50s showing military jets and prop planes used water injection or internal combustion piston engines or turbojets, not high bypass turbofans. Again, not high bypass turbofans. High bypass turbofans, jet engines, the type of engines that are on the jets producing the massive plumes today, are virtually incapable of generating condensation trails. Another claim is high levels of aluminum in rainwater is normal. There are very few atmospheric studies that show unusually high levels of aluminum in rainwater. These studies are often presented by disinformation contractors as evidence. However, these studies are in the vast minority, and they are conducted near the ocean, downwind of industry, or other contaminating factors. There are countless studies and water monitoring programs that show historically that aluminum should not occur in rainwater, but studies selected by disinformation contractors are carefully selected to convince the public that the contaminated rainwater is normal, and it's not. That's not normal. Another claim is that condensation from burnt kerosene freezes and produces ice crystals at high altitudes. The fact is that the vast majority of trails witnessed are at lower or medium altitudes, making this claim irrelevant. The fact is that at high altitudes, the air is colder and thinner, rendering it less capable of holding moisture. This dry air further incapacitates high bypass turbofans from producing contrails. Remember that most of the air coming out of the high bypass turbofan jet engine is simply just pushed through the big round duct by a fan blade, by many fan blades called the fan, and does not get combusted at all. The United States government and many governments are currently spending millions of dollars annually to confuse the public on various issues such as geoengineering and chemtrails. They're even teaching children, school children, that the trails are harmless water vapor. This level of disinformation is unprecedented because a harmful, dangerous, and illegal program of this is also unprecedented. When those committing these epic crimes against humanity are caught, they will be prosecuted and executed. So they will spare no expense to convince the public that the sudden appearance of sky-covering plumes is normal. Think about it. Their life is in danger, and so they're going to spare no expense to convince the public that this stuff is normal. So they're going to scratch and scratch and scratch to stay alive and lie. It's vital that everyone explores this issue while keeping in mind that this information is being produced in the form of books, videos, Facebook accounts, blogs, photos, and that some of this information is even aimed at changing history by convincing the public that contrails have always been around. You will be seeing more plumes appearing in old remastered movies and commercials. You will be seeing plumes appearing in books that have been artificially aged to look like they're from decades ago. You'll be seeing medical studies made to look decades old and injected into journals and magazines that are archived online. This type of propaganda is not unique to our time. All of these methods have been used before. But with today's technology, the ability to deceive is incomprehensible because the ability to produce and distribute well-coordinated propaganda is surprisingly easy. So, in short, high bypass turbofan jet engines do not create condensation trails and are virtually incapable of producing condensation trails. What is coming out of the jets is an aerosol spray, and if you look closely on many of the pylons on the number of the aircraft, you'll see nozzles, and it's right in line with the exhaust output, and there are several ways to store these chemicals in the aircraft. You can use the center wing tank or unit load devices in the cargo bay near the center of gravity of the aircraft. So don't be fooled. Long or short, if you see a trail coming out of a jet, with very few exceptions, it's an intentional toxic chemical aerosol, a chemtrail. It's sprayed over populations. That's an inhumane act on a population. That makes it a crime against humanity. Police chiefs take notice and act.